story of the Piave, summer 1918. The road from Mestre ran straight through the flat country, and then it curved up into the hills, and there were artillery positions on the hills, and you could see the guns at dusk when the crews were still moving around them. Nick had driven the road many times, and he knew where the bad places were, and he knew where the road was shelled and where it was not, and he knew the times of day when the shelling was usually light. In the evening it was usually light on the road to the river, and they made most of their runs in the evening. There were 4 ambulances in the section, and Nick drove the second one. The other drivers were Bartolo, who was from Milan but spoke no English, Gavini, who was young and very quiet, and Passini, who talked all the time and was funny in a way that did not require you to speak Italian well to understand. They were all good drivers. The ambulances were Fiats, and they were old, and the roads were bad, and you had to know the roads to drive them fast enough to do any good. Nick had come over from America the winter before. He was 19 years old and from northern Michigan, and he had not wanted to wait for the American army to form and train and cross and be organized and then maybe fight. He had wanted to come over, and he had talked to the Red Cross people in New York, and they had said yes, and he had gone home and told his father, and his father had said he did not understand it, but he supposed it was all right. His mother had cried. He had taken the train to New York and the ship across, and in the spring he was driving an ambulance on the Venetian plain. It was good work. You were always moving, and there was always something to do, and when you had wounded in the back you drove carefully but as fast as you could, and you thought only about the road and the wounded and where you were going. Afterward you did not think about what you had seen. You cleaned the ambulance and ate something and slept or talked with the others, and in the morning you drove again. The section was billeted in a farmhouse south of the river, and the farmer had gone and taken his family away when the fighting came close, and now the house was just a place where they slept and ate. There was a kitchen with a long table, and they ate there and played cards there, and in the evenings they sat outside on the stone step and smoked and watched the light on the mountains to the north. The light on the mountains was very beautiful in the evening, and sometimes the guns would flash on the mountains at night, and you could see the flashes before you heard the sound. Gavini sat on the step one evening and watched the mountains. "Do you think it will end this year?" he said. "I don't know," Nick said. "I think maybe it will end this year. Maybe. My brother is at the Isonzo," Gavini said. "He has been there 2 years. That's a long time." "Yes." Gavini lit a cigarette. "He says in his letters it is bad at the Isonzo." "It's bad here too," Nick said. "Yes, but different bad." Nick did not say anything. He smoked and watched the mountains, and after a while Gavini went inside and Nick sat alone on the step until it was full dark, and then he went inside too. In July, the Austrians tried to cross the river. They came across at 2 places, and for 3 days it was very bad, and the section ran continuously, and there was no sleeping and no eating except what you could eat cold from tins while you drove. Nick made 11 runs in those 3 days, and on the 3rd day he stopped counting. The crossing points were at Fossalta and at a place downstream where there was a bend in the river, and the Austrians had been trying to cross there for 2 weeks, but the water was too wide and the Italian artillery covered the bend well. At Fossalta the Austrians got across and held a bridgehead for most of the 2nd day, and the Italian infantry counterattacked in the afternoon and by evening had pushed them back to the river, but the cost was very high and there were many men to carry. Nick drove through the night of the 1st day and into the morning of the 2nd, and the road was shelled intermittently, and twice he had to stop because of craters and go around through the fields. The fields were wheat fields, and the wheat was ripe, and the ambulance made a track through the wheat that you could see in the headlights. He picked up 4 men at a dressing station behind the lines, and 2 of them were wounded badly in the legs, and 1 had a chest wound, and 1 had a bandaged head and could not speak. Nick drove south toward the field hospital, and he tried not to think about the man with the chest wound because the chest wound made a sound when the man breathed, and it was not a good sound. At the field hospital he helped carry the stretchers in, and a doctor came out and looked at the chest wound man first and then at the others. The doctor was very young, and he had been there a long time, and he did not look young anymore. Again, the doctor said. Yes, Nick said. How is it up there? Bad. More coming. Yes, Nick said. There are more. He drove back up the road. The sky was lightening in the east, and there were birds making noise in a copse of trees beside the road, and it seemed wrong that birds should make noise now. He was very tired. He put his hand out the window and felt the cool air, and the air smelled of grass and something else he recognized but did not name to himself. At the dressing station there were 12 more men waiting. Passini was wounded on the morning of the third day. He was riding with Nick because his own ambulance had a broken axle and was being repaired, and they were short-handed and there was room. They were at a forward dressing station, a cellar beneath a farmhouse, loading a man onto the stretcher when there was a sound like canvas tearing very loudly and then the explosion. It was a trench mortar and it hit the road 30 meters from where they were, and there were fragments that came through the doorway. Nick was not hit. He was behind the wall and the wall stopped the fragments. Passini was in the doorway. Nick got to Passini quickly. He knelt beside him on the stone floor. I'm all right, Passini said. You're not all right, Nick said. Passini looked down at himself. He had been hit in both legs below the knee. His right foot was gone. He looked at it with a very calm expression. Ah, he said. Don't look at it, Nick said. It doesn't hurt, Passini said. I know. That's strange, isn't it? That it doesn't hurt. It will hurt later, Nick said. He was wrapping Passini's right leg above where the foot had been. He worked quickly. The blood was very dark. Don't let them take my leg, Passini said. Not both of them. They'll take care of you, Nick said. Tell them. Tell the doctor. I'll tell them, Nick said. There was a medico there and he helped Nick, and together they got Passini into the ambulance. They put the other wounded man in too. Passini had stopped talking. His face had gone very white. Passini, Nick said. Passini opened his eyes. You're going to be fine, Nick said. Of course, Passini said. And then he said something in Italian that Nick did not understand, and then he was quiet. Nick drove south as fast as he could. He drove on the crown of the road, and when another vehicle came, the other vehicle had to get off, and he did not slow down. He talked to Passini as he drove, just words, not anything particular, just talking so that Passini could hear a voice, and Passini did not say anything, but Nick kept talking until they reached the field hospital. The doctor looked at Passini's legs. Tell him not to take both, Nick said. He asked me to tell you. The doctor did not say anything. He was looking at the legs. Did you hear me? Nick said. I heard you, the doctor said. He was very tired. He had been operating for 2 days without sleeping, and his gown was not white anymore. Go clean your ambulance, he said. Nick went outside. He leaned against the ambulance. It was a warm morning and the sun was up now and the birds were still making noise somewhere. He was very tired. He lit a cigarette and smoked it, and then he cleaned the ambulance, and when he was done he drove back up to the dressing station. After the Austrians were pushed back across the river, the section went back to the regular runs, and it was easier for a while. The Italians had held, and there was something good in that, a feeling along the road and in the towns, and even the wounded who came in seemed to feel it, though this was perhaps only something Nick imagined. He did not know. He drove and slept and ate, and sometimes he went into the village in the evening and drank wine with Bartolo, who was the only one whose Italian Nick could follow well enough to have a real conversation. Bartolo was a large man with a black mustache, and he had been a mechanic before the war, and he loved the ambulances the way a father loves difficult children. He could hear what was wrong with an engine before the gauges showed it, and he could fix almost anything with what was available. He kept his ambulance very clean, and he drove it with great care, and it was the ambulance that ran most reliably, though it was no newer than the others. They sat in the back of a wine shop one evening and drank the local red wine, which was not very good, but which was wine. "You are sad about Passini," Bartolo said. He said it in Italian. "Yes," Nick said in Italian. "He will be all right. He is strong." The doctor didn't say anything. Doctors never say anything. It's their training. Bartolo drank some wine. "I saw Passini last January in Milan on my leave. He took me to a restaurant. He knew everyone there, the owner, the waiters. He ordered everything." Bartolo shook his head. "He spent a great deal of money." "That sounds like him," Nick said. "Yes." Bartolo poured more wine. "He will find a way to be all right. He is that kind of person." Nick drank the wine. He did not know if Passini would be all right or not, but he thought about him being at the restaurant in Milan in January, ordering everything, knowing everyone, spending too much money. It was a good thing to think about. "What will you do after?" Bartolo said. "After the war?" "Yes." "I don't know," Nick said. "Go home, I suppose. I have a place. In Michigan. There are lakes there and good fishing." "Fishing," Bartolo said. He liked the word. "I would like to fish somewhere after the war. You should come to Michigan." "Perhaps," Bartolo said. He did not believe it, but he said it in a way that left it open, as a thing that could possibly happen if the world arranged itself correctly, which it rarely did. "I have a garage in Milan," he said. "Or I had one. I don't know what's there now. My brother is looking after it." "You'll go back to that?" "Yes. There will be many cars that need work after the war. Governments always buy too many vehicles, and then afterward there are all these vehicles that need maintenance. It will be good for business." They finished the wine and walked back to the farmhouse. The night was warm and the stars were clear and there was no sound of guns. On quiet nights you could forget sometimes, for minutes at a time, that it was happening at all. Nick was hit on a Tuesday evening in August. He did not know it was a Tuesday at first. He knew it was evening because the light was going, and he knew it was August because it was hot, the kind of heat that stays in the ground all day and then rises up at you in the evening, and he had been thinking about this heat when the mortar round came in, and then he was not thinking about anything. He had been crouching behind a low stone wall at a forward position, waiting while the medical orderly finished bandaging a man so they could load him. It was a wall where they stored equipment, and Nick had set his helmet on the wall while he lit a cigarette, and this was foolish, and he knew it was foolish even as he did it, but he was tired and the cigarette required two hands to light in the wind. The mortar round hit in the road beyond the wall. He was on his back looking up at the sky. He did not know how he came to be on his back. The sky had a color in it from the light going down, and there was a smell of burning. He tried to move his right leg and it moved, and he tried to move his left leg and it did not move at first, and then it did, but it was different from the right leg. He put his hand down to his left leg. His trousers were wet. He understood what this meant. The orderly was there. He was the same orderly who had been bandaging the other man. "Don't move," the orderly said in Italian. "I'm all right," Nick said in English and then in Italian. "You are hit," the orderly said. "I know it. Don't move." Nick lay back. The sky was very clear above him and the color was draining out of it. He thought this was interesting, watching the color go, and he thought that he was very calm, and he wondered how long this calmness would last. He had heard men say they did not feel it at first. He had seen this himself, men who were badly wounded and talked quietly and carefully, and then later, when you were driving, you heard them in the back and they were not quiet anymore. The orderly was wrapping his leg. Nick watched the sky. There was pain beginning in his leg, a deep kind of pain that was not sharp yet but had the quality of becoming sharp, the way a sound starts far away and grows. "How bad?" Nick said. "Not too bad." the orderly said. This was what you always said. Tell me the truth, Nick said. The orderly wrapped the bandage and tied it. He was efficient and calm, and his hands did not shake, which Nick noticed and appreciated. The knee, the orderly said. There are fragments. We need to get you back. All right, Nick said. Can you sit up? Nick sat up. His leg hurt when he moved it, but the kind of pain it was now was something you could be with. He had thought it would be different. He had thought many times about what it would be like to be hit, and it had always been a thing he could not quite imagine clearly, and now that it had happened he thought he had imagined it wrong. The reality was more ordinary than he had expected, which was strange given how unordinary it was. They got him into the back of his own ambulance. The other man was already there, and Nick lay across from him. The other man had a bandage on his chest, and he was unconscious. Someone else drove. Nick did not know who was driving. He lay on his back and felt the road through the springs of the ambulance and watched the roof of the ambulance and tried to think of things that were not his leg. He thought about the lake in Michigan. He thought about the particular lake, a small one north of Petoskey, where his father had a camp, and the way it looked in early morning before anyone else was up, when the mist was still on the water and the light was just coming and the fish were rising. He had been going there since he was very young. He knew every part of the shore and where the weeds were and where the bottom dropped off and where you could wade and where you could not. His father had taught him to fish there. His father was a quiet man who could sit in a boat for many hours without speaking and who never fished with anything but dry flies on principle. Nick had loved those mornings very much. He thought about these mornings and the pain in his leg grew while he thought about them, and the two things existed at the same time, the lake in the morning and the pain, and after a while the pain was louder than the lake and he stopped trying to think about the lake and just let the pain be what it was. He was not afraid of dying. He had thought about this, and what he concluded was that you were afraid of dying right up until you were possibly dying, and then you were not afraid in the same way anymore. The fear became something else. It became a kind of attention. You paid attention very carefully to everything. He had noticed this at the river crossing, the 3 days of running, the awareness he had of everything around him, the sharpness of it. Now lying in the back of the ambulance he had the sharpness again. He noticed the sound of the engine. He noticed the smell of petrol and something sweet, which was blood, he supposed, from the other man or from himself. He noticed the way the light came through a crack in the rear door and lay in a thin line on the floor of the ambulance and moved with the road. He noticed the feel of the wool blanket under his hands. He noticed that he was thirsty. The field hospital was a school building that had been taken over in the spring and had not been a school since. They brought Nick in on a stretcher and put him in a room that had maps still on the walls and a smell of chalk. There were other men in the room, 6 of them on low beds, and they were in various states of consciousness. A nurse came and looked at his leg and gave him something, and after a while the pain was less close. A doctor came in the evening. He was different from the doctor Nick had spoken to about Passini. This doctor was older and had gray hair, and he examined Nick's leg carefully and without expression. "The knee," he said. "Yes," Nick said. "There are fragments. You can feel them? I can feel something in there. Tomorrow we'll take them out." "All right. It's not too bad," the doctor said. He said this differently from the orderly. He said it in a way that made Nick believe it was true or mostly true. "You were lucky with the direction." "I didn't feel lucky," Nick said. "No, you wouldn't." The doctor put his hand on Nick's shoulder briefly. "Tomorrow," he said. "Rest now." The nurse came later and Nick asked her about Passini, and she did not know who Passini was, and he described him, and she thought about it and said there was a man with leg wounds who had come from up near the river and had been sent on to the hospital in Milan. "Is he all right?" Nick said. "I don't know," she said. She was a young woman and she seemed very capable. "How long have you been here?" Nick said. "Since November," she said. "That's a long time." "Yes." She straightened his blanket. "How old are you?" she said. 19. She looked at him. "You're very young." "I know it," Nick said. "Try to sleep," she said. He lay in the dark in the old schoolroom and listened to the other men breathe and tried to sleep. Through the window he could see a piece of sky with stars in it. He thought about his leg and whether the doctor was right that it was not too bad, and he decided to believe the doctor because there was no use in not believing him and it was possible he was right. He thought about Passini in Milan. He hoped Passini was in a good hospital and that there were good doctors there. He hoped Passini was telling everyone in the hospital what to do and making them laugh. He tried to sleep. After a while he slept. In the morning they operated. They gave him something before and then there was a period he did not remember, and then he was back in the room with the maps and his leg felt different, wrapped heavily and elevated, and the doctor came and said they had taken the fragments out and that it had gone well. "How long?" Nick said. "Before you can drive?" "Yes. 2 months. Perhaps more. The knee is delicate." Nick thought about this. 2 months was a long time. August and September. It would be autumn before he could drive again. He thought about what it would be like to not be driving, to be in a hospital while it went on. "Can I go somewhere?" he said. "You'll go to Milan," the doctor said. "To the hospital there. It's better equipped for the convalescence." "All right," Nick said. The nurse helped him write letters that afternoon. He wrote to his father and mother in Michigan. He told them he had been wounded but was not badly hurt and was being well cared for. He told them about the hospital and that he would be in Milan. He said there was nothing to worry about. He told them the truth about what had happened, but he did not tell them everything about it, and he did not tell them about Passini. He tried to tell them what the countryside looked like, the mountains and the river and the plain, but it was hard to do this in a letter, and what he wrote did not capture it. He wrote to Bartolo at the section address. He told Bartolo about the knee and said he would be in Milan and that if Bartolo had leave he should come and they would eat together. He said he hoped the section was managing without him and that he hoped the ambulances were running well. He said that if he could get the address of the hospital where Passini was he would go to see him. He asked Bartolo to write and let him know how things were at the section and what was happening on the river. The nurse took the letters. "You have friends in the section," she said. "Yes," Nick said. "That's good," she said. She seemed to mean it. "It's a good thing to have." "I know it," Nick said. The transport to Milan was the next day. They loaded several men into a hospital train in the evening, and Nick lay in a narrow berth and watched the dark countryside go past. He could not sleep well because of the leg, and so he lay in the dark and watched the country, and after a while the mountains were behind them, and there was no more artillery sound, and the country was flat, and there were lights in farms and towns, and in a village there were people standing on a platform who waved at the hospital train as it went through, and Nick watched them until they were past. He thought about what it would mean to be finished with this. He thought about going home to Michigan and whether he was finished with this or not and what it would be like either way. When he had come over, he had not thought much about going back. He had thought about the ambulances and the driving and whether he would do it well. He had not thought beyond that. Now, lying in the berth with his leg elevated, he thought about afterward, and he could not see it clearly. He could see the lake in the morning, and he could see the town where he had grown up and his father's house, but he could not see himself in these places. He supposed you had to be there to be able to see it. The man in the berth above him coughed and then stopped coughing and then coughed again. "Are you all right?" Nick said. "Yes," the man said. His voice was hoarse. "I keep coughing. It's the dust from the roads," Nick said. He had heard other men say this. Maybe, the man said. He coughed again. Where are you from? Nick said. Torino, the man said. You are American? Yes. Michigan, Nick said. I don't know it, the man said. It's in the north. There are lakes. Ah, the man said. Torino is in the north also. I know it, Nick said. After the war I will go back there, the man said. I have a family there. Good, Nick said. You have a family? My parents, Nick said. And a sister. You are young, the man said. Yes. You should not be here, the man said, but he said it without criticism, only as an observation. You should be at home. I know it, Nick said. The train moved through the dark country, and after a while the man from Torino stopped talking and Nick supposed he slept. Nick lay in his berth and watched the dark out the window and thought about Michigan and about being young, which he was, and about whether it was a problem to be young in a war or whether it was only something that was true about you the way other things were true about you, the way it was true that you were from Michigan and had a father who fished with dry flies. He thought he would write a better letter home from Milan, from the hospital, when he had time and a desk to write at. He would try to explain more about the country and what it was like. He wanted them to be able to see it, the mountains especially, the way they looked in the evening with the snow still on them in July. He wanted to find the words for that, but he didn't know if there were words good enough or whether he could find them even if there were. The train made a sound on the rails, a regular sound, and the dark country moved past, and Nick's leg ached in a steady way that he had made his peace with, and somewhere behind him the war was still happening. The guns were going, the ambulances were moving on the white roads, the dressing stations were lit with lanterns, and the river was there at the end of everything, wide and fast and cold from the mountains, and on the other side of it there were men who wanted to cross, and on this side there were men who would not let them, and between all of it there were the wounded and the stretchers and the ambulances and the long roads south. He lay in the dark and the train moved, and after a while he slept. Milan was a city, and after the months on the Venetian plain it was strange to be in a city. There were people on the streets who were not soldiers. There were shops and restaurants and women in dresses and old men at cafe tables and children. Nick watched them from the window of the car that took him from the station to the hospital, and he thought they looked strange, and then he thought no, it was he who was strange, and the city was as it had always been, a city going on as cities do. The hospital was in a large building near the park, and his room had a window that looked out on trees. There were good doctors and good nurses, and the knee was examined again, and they said what the first doctor had said, that it had gone well, and that with care he would have good use of the leg. He believed them. He was learning to believe doctors when they said good things. He found where Passini was. He was in the same hospital 2 floors above, which Nick had not expected. He went up on crutches in the second week, when he was allowed to move around, and found Passini's room. Passini was sitting up in bed. He had lost weight and he looked tired, but he was talking when Nick came in, talking to a nurse who was trying to take his temperature. And he stopped talking when he saw Nick, and then he laughed. You too, Passini said. Me too, Nick said. The knee, Passini said. They told me. Sit down, sit down. Have you met this nurse? She is called Maria, and she won't let me talk enough. He talks too much, the nurse said. You see, she doesn't understand. Talking is how I get well. It's how you get everyone else sick, the nurse said, and she took his temperature and wrote it down and left. Nick sat down beside the bed. Passini looked at him with his dark eyes, and the look was different from how Passini usually looked. More careful, more aware of something. But after a moment it went away and he was himself again. Your leg, Nick said. They took the right one below the knee, Passini said. He said it simply as a fact. The left one is all right. It doesn't work perfectly, but it's there. They say with a prosthetic device for the right I will walk again. Good, Nick said. Yes. Passini looked out the window. The trees were there outside his window too, different trees, and the sky beyond them. I have been thinking, he said. In here you think too much. There is not enough to do. What have you been thinking about? Many things. About the restaurant I wanted to open. Before the war I had this plan. Have I told you? No, Nick said. A small place, Passini said. In the Brera neighborhood. Not expensive, just good. Good simple food, good wine, a few tables. You know what makes a restaurant? The food, Nick said. No, that's what everyone says. The food is important, but it is not what makes a restaurant. What makes a restaurant is whether people want to come back. You can have very good food and people come once and say, yes, very good food, and then they don't come back because there is nothing there. What makes people come back is that they feel something in the place. The feeling. Do you understand? I think so, Nick said. In the best places, Passini said. You feel that you are in exactly the right place to be for that evening. That there is nowhere else in the world you should be at that moment. The food is good and the wine is good and the people at the other tables are good. Even strangers are good in a place like this and you feel it. He stopped. I want to make a place like that, he said. You will, Nick said. Passini looked at him. Yes, he said. I will. I have decided. He said it as if he had been debating it and had come to a conclusion. Perhaps he had. They talked for an hour. Passini asked about the section and Nick told him about the river crossing and about Bartolo and Gavini, and Passini listened carefully and asked questions, and Nick realized that Passini missed it, the section and the work, and this surprised him because he had not thought about missing it, but now listening to himself talk about it he thought that perhaps he would miss it too when he was further from it. Not the worst of it, but the rest of it. The driving and the roads and the early mornings and the evenings on the steppe watching the mountains. When he left Passini's room, he went downstairs on his crutches slowly and went back to his own room and sat by the window and looked at the trees. The afternoon light came through the trees and moved on the floor of the room. He thought about Passini and the restaurant and about what it was that made people want to come back to a place. He thought it was probably different things for different people and that the best places had enough different things that most people could find one of them. He wrote to his father that afternoon. He wrote about the hospital and about Passini and the restaurant Passini was going to open. He wrote about the plane trees outside his window and the sound the city made that was different from the sound of the plane. He did not write about the knee in detail, but he said it was better and that the doctors were good. He wrote, **I think about the lake sometimes. I think about the mornings up there when it's quiet and the mist is on the water and there's nothing happening yet. I think I'll be glad to be there again. **. He paused. He thought about what else to say and he could not think of what else to say, so he finished the letter and addressed it and gave it to the nurse to post. In September, the Italian army and the Allied forces began the offensive at Vittorio Veneto. Nick heard about it in the hospital and followed it in the newspapers that the nurses brought and in what the other patients said. It went well. It went much better than anyone had expected it to go. In October there were great advances and the Austrians fell back across the Piave and kept falling back, and then the armistice with Austria-Hungary came on November 4th and it was over on the Italian front. Nick was not there for any of this. He had been moved to a smaller convalescent facility south of Milan in September, and he was learning to walk again without crutches and doing the exercises the doctors told him to do and eating 3 meals a day and sleeping well, and his knee was coming along, though it was not right yet and might not be exactly right for a long time, they said, though he would have good use of it. He heard about the armistice in the afternoon when a nurse came in and told everyone, and there was noise in the halls. Nick sat on his bed and felt something, but he could not have said exactly what it was. He was glad. He was glad it was over. But there was something else there too, under the gladness, something he did not look at directly. He thought about Bartolo and Gavini and the others still at the section and whether they were safe and what they were doing now that it was over. He thought about the farmhouse and the steppe and the mountains. He thought about the river and how it had looked in the early morning light when he had driven down to it in the summer, wide and gray-green and very fast. He did not think about whether the things he had done had mattered. He had driven wounded men to the hospital and some of them had lived and some had not, and he had done this work as well as he could and now it was over. He thought it was something to have done this work, though he was not sure yet what it was or how to think about it. He supposed he would have time to think about it. He wrote letters that evening. He wrote to Bartolo. He wrote to Gavini. He wrote a letter to Passini, who was back in Milan now at his mother's house, and who had written to Nick in September saying he was getting used to the prosthetic device and could walk with a cane, and that he had found the location for the restaurant. Not in the Brera after all, but in a small street near the cathedral, and the rent was reasonable and the kitchen was good. Nick wrote, I heard it ended today. I suppose we both knew it had to end sometime. I'm glad it's over and I'm glad we're both here to see it. I will come to Milan when they let me out of here and you can show me the restaurant. I think it sounds like a good place. He sealed the letter and then he sat and looked out the window. It was evening and the light was going. There was a garden outside the window with late roses in it, the kind that survive into October, still red but beginning to be battered by the weather. Tomorrow he would write to his parents and tell them he was coming home. He thought about what he would find when he came home and what it would look like and what it would feel like to be in Michigan after this, after everything. He thought he would go up north first thing, to the lake, even if it was cold by the time he got there. He would go up north and spend a few days and do some fishing if the fishing was any good still, and if not he would just be there, near the water, in the quiet. He sat by the window and watched the light go out of the garden and thought about the lake and about Passini's restaurant and about Bartolo in Milan with his garage and Gavini, who was young, going back to wherever Gavini was from. He thought about the river and about the men who had crossed it and the men who had not crossed it and the men he had carried south in the back of the ambulance and the men he had not been able to carry fast enough. He sat there a long time and after a while the garden was dark and the roses were invisible and there was only the shape of things, darker and lighter dark, and the light from his room making a rectangle on the grass. He was 19 years old. In December he would be 20. He thought about being 20 and what it would mean and whether he would be different, and he decided you were always more or less yourself no matter what happened to you, though what happened to you was in you afterward whether you wanted it or not, and that was all right. That was how it was. He got up and undressed and got into bed. Through the window the stars were out, very clear after a cloudy day, the way they always are when the clouds finally go. He looked at them through the glass and then he stopped looking and closed his eyes. Outside somewhere there was a bell ringing, a church bell in the town, marking the hour, and after it finished ringing the night was quiet. He slept.